Major breaking news. The United States Supreme Court has just ruled yet again for President Donald Trump over the deep state. This case, Trump versus Bole, deals with whether or not Donald Trump controls, as part of his executive privilege, if you will, his executive powers, the Consumer Product Safety Commission and the ability to appoint people to run it. Let's break it down when we come back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Box of Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, this is huge news. Another huge victory for American freedom and Donald Trump over the deep state. As a reminder, the deep state are those unelected bureaucrats that want to boss us around and tell us what to do, including when it comes to our Second Amendment rights. To be free and clear from any political influences, also known as be free and clear from any influence of we the people that actually give them the authority to make decisions on our behalf. That's right, in a major decision here in the case of Trump versus Mary Bole, the U.S. Supreme Court has just stayed, which means paused or stopped, a lower court decision out of Maryland and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit that would have allowed 3 commissioners of the Consumer Product Safety Commission to remain in place even though Donald Trump as president fired them. That's right. This is a case involving whether or not Donald Trump under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution is allowed to actually exercise his full-blown executive powers, where the U.S. Constitution Article 2's text literally says that the executive powers in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution shall be vested in a president. Singular. One guy. One dude. The president. And yet you have these so-called independent agencies that have been set up over the last many decades. And the Consumer Product Safety Commission was set up in the 1970s. But a lot of these independent agencies have been set up going all the way back to the 1930s under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And what this really is Congress usurping the authority and powers under the Constitution from the president. Just to jog your memory, Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution creates the powers of the Congress. Article 2, the powers of the president. And Article 3 sets forth and creates the United States Supreme Court and the federal courts. So here in this case, there are 3 members of the Consumer Product Safety Commission who had been appointed by Democrats. Donald Trump came into office and said, wait a minute, the Consumer Product Safety Commission is part of the executive branch. Under Article 2 of the Constitution itself, I, Donald Trump, as the president, am in charge and invested with all the authority in the executive branch. You can't have an independent agency, independent from Congress, independent from the presidency, independent from the Supreme Court. Why? Because then you have a fourth branch of government making decisions. And that is a no-go, and that is exactly what the U.S. Supreme Court just said in the 6-3 decision. In this case of Trump versus Bole, 6-3 with the usual left-wing dissenters. Justice Kagan wrote the dissent, signed on by Justice Sotomayor and Justice Brown Jackson. But the 3 justices in the majority said, indeed, the lower court decision to say that these individuals that were commissioners on the Consumer Product Safety Commission can stay in their jobs, notwithstanding the fact that President Trump fired them. And the lower courts argued that because the federal statute, listen carefully, because a federal statute said they could only be removed for cause, meaning they neglected their duty or misbehaved in some way. But none of that matters because, again, the notion of an independent agency, independent from Congress, independent from the courts, independent from the president, is verboten. It's not allowed. We only have 3 branches of government. And if you have a branch of government, the executive branch, that's doing stuff that we don't like, we get to get mad about and complain to the president. But if you create an independent agency, which this was, and the president doesn't control it, you have the worst of all worlds. You have an agency out there pretending or acting as if they have the blessings of the President of the United States when they haven't even been appointed by this President of the United States. And if they do something stupid, if they do something wrong, if they do something that's politically unpopular, then the Consumer Product Safety Commission gets blamed And guess who gets blamed? The President of the United States, because the Consumer Product Safety Commission is part of the executive branch. And that is just not fair. And as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump needs to fire every single member in the executive branch that he possibly can that is a leftover, a holdover from prior Democratic administrations. And that is essentially where the Supreme Court is going with this. So specifically, here's what the U.S. Supreme Court wrote in favor of President Trump over, yet again, these unelected bureaucrats, also known, frankly, as the deep state in Washington, D.C. Here's what the Supreme Court wrote. The application for stay presented to the Chief Justice and by him referred to the court is granted. The application is squarely controlled by Trump versus Wilcox. Although our interim orders are not conclusive as to the merits, they inform how a court should exercise its equitable discretion in cases like this. The stay we issued in Wilcox earlier this year reflected our judgment that the government, that's the federal government, Donald Trump, the government faces greater risk of harm from an order allowing a removed officer to continue exercising the executive power than a wrongly removed officer faces from being unable to perform her statutory duty. The same is true on the facts presented here, where the Consumer Product Safety Commission exercises executive power in a similar manner as the National Labor Relations Board, and the case does not otherwise differ from Wilcox in any pertinent respect. That's the key. Do you hear the key language here, folks? The Supreme Court said that the Consumer Product Safety Commission exercises executive powers. No can do. Why? Because the text of the Constitution itself literally says the executive powers of this great country, the executive powers of the federal government, shall be vested in whom? Vested in the president. Therefore, if the president wants to use his Article 2 powers to fire some dude or dudette that's working in the executive branch with the blessings effectively of the president, then that's the president's prerogative. That's the president's decision. And that's what the Supreme Court is saying here. And the fact is the Supreme Court is stepping up and doing its job and getting rid of these independent agencies that are independent away and apart and from the president. That is not allowed under constitutional system of government. That's the reality of it. Now let's look at this dissent from Justice Kagan, Elena Kagan. And you can see how stressed she is that we, the people, through voting for the President of the United States, get to have a say over these so-called independent commissions, these independent agencies. Remember, folks, listen carefully. This is important to remember this. There is no such thing as an independent executive agency. They are beholden to the President of the United States, who is vested with all those constitutional powers of the executive branch. Vested. Those are his. Nevertheless, listen to what Justice Elena Kagan is saying. Very upset that the elected President of the United States is able to fire these unelected bureaucrats that were appointed by presidents that, frankly, don't like the Trump agenda. Here's what Justice Kagan wrote in her dissent, signed on to by Brown Jackson and Justice Sotomayor. Once again, the Supreme Court uses its emergency docket to destroy the independence of an independent agency, as established by Congress. 2 months ago in Trump versus Wilcox, the majority issued a stay allowing the president to discharge without any cause Democratic members of the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit Systems Protection Board. Today, the same majority stay permits the president to fire, again without cause, the Democratic members of the Consumer Product Safety Commission. Congress provided that the Consumer Product Safety Commission, like the NLRB and the MSPB, would operate as a classic independent agency, a multi-member bipartisan commission whose members serve staggered terms and cannot be removed except for good reason. In Congress's view, that structure would better enable the Consumer Product Safety Commission to achieve its mission, ensuring the safety of consumer products from toys to appliances, than would a single-party agency under the full control of a single president. This, folks, is hooey. Remember how I taught you that here on the Four Boxes, I will train you and you will learn to defeat law professors and lawyers when it comes to the Constitution? Just compare sentence 1 of Article 2 of the Constitution with what Justice Kagan just wrote in her dissent. In the Supreme Court of the United States, she wrote, this court uses its emergency docket to destroy the independence of an independent agency. Folks, there's no such thing as an independent agency in our system of federal government. You got the Congress. You got the president. You got the Supreme Court and the lower courts. Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. There is no such thing as an independent fourth branch of government agency. And I'm happy to report that the U.S. Supreme Court today, including Justice Amy Coney Barrett, for those of you naysayers out there, just got to remind you, I don't want to spike the ball on your heads and say I told you so, but yet again, Justice Amy Coney Barrett rules for Donald Trump, as well she should, because she is following the text of the Constitution, which is what a good originalist does. And they are all saying exactly that there is no such thing as a fourth branch of government, notwithstanding what terrible Supreme Court precedents have to say about that issue, going all the way back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency in the 1930s. And I will just leave you with this. In addition to this major win for Donald Trump against the deep state today, in this case of Trump versus Bole, and another blow to the unelected bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., the deep state, the other good signal, as I see it, when it comes to, for example, Second Amendment rights, including the National Firearms Act issues, NFA issues, is that effectively what the Supreme Court is doing here is they are overturning a 1935 Supreme Court precedent called Humphrey's Executor, which held that members of multi-member boards in so-called agencies or independent agencies, whatever you want to call them, they can't be fired by the president without cause. The Supreme Court right now is overturning that effectively step by step. The reason why that's important, if this U.S. Supreme Court is more than willing to overturn the 1935 Depression-era, FDR-era Humphrey's Executor decision, what other legal precedents from the 1930s that we have been suffering under as American citizens since then, what other legal precedents and Supreme Court precedents and other statutes, for example, might be on the chopping block by this current U.S. Supreme Court? And perhaps the National Firearms Act might be on that list. Only time will tell. So there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, bringing you good news of another example of a Maryland court and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit getting slapped down, along with the deep state, by the Supreme Court in favor of President Trump. And don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble on this channel. And of course, don't forget to follow me over there on X at @4boxdiner for even more content. And I look forward to talking to all of you again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.